The room was filled with executives who had spent decades chasing power. Yet in that single moment, every eye was fixed on one man quietly signing a document that would make him one of the wealthiest people on earth. Camera flashes lit up the boardroom as reporters leaned forward, desperate to capture history in the making. Then the heavy doors opened. A woman stepped inside with tears running down her face. The whispers stopped. The photographers lowered their cameras. Even the lawyers looked up in disbelief. The man slowly raised his eyes from the contract, and the expression on his face revealed that he knew exactly who she was before she spoke a single word. Years earlier, she had stood in a courthouse asking a judge to end their marriage because she no longer believed in his future. Now she stood only a few feet away, her voice shaking as she fought back tears before quietly saying, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Nobody in that room knew the painful history hidden behind those words. They saw a billionaire moments away from officially taking control of an unimaginable fortune, but they did not see the lonely nights, the unpaid bills, the broken promises, or the humiliation that had followed him for years. They had no idea that the woman standing before him had once laughed at the dream everyone else also believed was impossible. They did not know that only a short time earlier he had been wondering how he would pay his rent while eating inexpensive meals just to survive another week. They certainly did not know that one unexpected phone call had rewritten the course of his entire life. The fortune he was about to inherit was estimated at $100 billion, placing him among the richest people alive almost overnight. Stories like this often sound too extraordinary to believe. Yet history has repeatedly shown that enormous fortunes have unexpectedly passed to relatives, forgotten heirs, and people whose names were barely known until a lawyer reached out with life-changing news. Across America, families have fought legal battles over massive estates, hidden inheritances, and business empires worth billions, proving that reality can sometimes be more unbelievable than fiction. But this story is not really about money. It is about loyalty, regret, second chances, and the painful truth that success has a strange way of revealing people's true feelings. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because by the end of this story, you may find yourself asking a difficult question. If the people who once abandoned you suddenly returned after your life changed forever, would you welcome them back with open arms? Or would you remember every word they said when nobody else believed in you? The answer seems simple now, but when you hear everything that happened before this unforgettable meeting, you may discover that the hardest decisions in life are never about money at all. Only a handful of people inside that boardroom knew the documents on the table represented far more than an extraordinary financial transaction. They marked the end of one chapter that had begun with hope, collapsed under disappointment, and somehow returned years later in a way nobody could have imagined. Long before television crews gathered outside corporate headquarters and before financial experts debated the future of a $100 billion empire, there had been wedding photographs filled with genuine smiles, quiet promises about growing old together, and two people convinced that love alone would be enough to overcome every obstacle life placed in front of them. Those memories slowly gave way to an almost empty apartment where unpaid bills covered the kitchen counter, where every conversation became another reminder that dreams did not always produce immediate success, and where silence often lasted longer than words. Eventually, that silence ended inside a courthouse, where divorce papers officially separated two lives that had once seemed impossible to pull apart. Years later, those same lives would collide again in front of cameras after an inheritance so enormous that it instantly captured national attention. The man who had once struggled to keep the lights on suddenly found himself responsible for companies valued in the tens of billions, private aircraft, luxury properties across several states, investment portfolios that stretched around the world, and a business empire built over generations. While financial news focused on the unbelievable size of the inheritance, another story was quietly unfolding behind the long before the cameras, the headlines, and the unimaginable inheritance. Ethan Brooks was simply another hard-working American in his early 40s chasing a dream that seemed to move farther away every time he reached for it. He wasn't born into wealth, didn't have powerful connections, and never enjoyed the kind of opportunities that make success look effortless. What he did have was an unshakable belief that persistence could eventually accomplish what talent alone never could. Ethan spent countless days pitching business ideas that investors dismissed within minutes. He worked late into the night refining proposals that rarely received a second look. While others laughed at his determination, he continued believing that one opportunity could change everything. Every rejection hurt, but none of them convinced him to quit. Friends often told him to settle for a stable career, stop chasing impossible goals, and accept an ordinary life. Yet Ethan refused to believe his future had already been decided. Standing beside him through much of that struggle was his wife, Lauren Brooks. In the beginning, Lauren admired his determination and encouraged him through every setback. She celebrated the small victories, comforted him after disappointments, and reminded him that every successful entrepreneur had once been an unknown dreamer. Together, they imagined building a life they could one day be proud of, convinced that the sacrifices they were making would eventually lead to something greater. But dreams become difficult to protect when reality demands payment every single month. The bills arrived faster than income. One business idea collapsed before it ever reached the market. Another consumed their savings without producing results, and each failure placed even more pressure on their marriage. The refrigerator gradually held less food than it once had. Overdue notices began replacing hopeful letters in the mailbox, and every missed mortgage payment brought them closer to losing the home they had worked so hard to buy. Their conversations slowly transformed into arguments about money, missed opportunities, and whether Ethan was refusing to face reality. Friends who once filled their living room with laughter stopped calling altogether, choosing distance over uncomfortable conversations about financial hardship. Lauren watched the man she loved continue chasing opportunities that never seemed to arrive, and the confidence she once had in his future slowly disappeared. She didn't leave because of one bad day or one failed business. She left because she stopped believing tomorrow would ever be different. The months following the divorce were some of the quietest Ethan Brooks had ever experienced. There were no dramatic speeches about proving anyone wrong, no secret plans for revenge, and no desperate attempts to win Lauren Brooks back. Every morning he woke up with the same goal he had carried for years: survive one more day and keep moving forward. He accepted consulting work wherever he could find it, rented a modest apartment with little more than the essentials, and slowly rebuilt the confidence that had been shattered by years of rejection. The silence that once felt unbearable gradually became a place where he could think clearly again. For the first time in years, Ethan stopped worrying about convincing other people to believe in him. Instead, he focused on becoming someone he could respect, even if nobody else noticed. Then, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and the voice on the other end introduced himself as an attorney representing a private estate. Ethan almost ended the call within seconds. Like many people, he had heard stories about inheritance scams and fraudulent calls promising impossible fortunes. He politely explained that they must have contacted the wrong person. The attorney calmly responded by mentioning the full name of Ethan's late father, along with details that had never appeared in public records. Ethan froze. His father had passed away years earlier, leaving behind more questions than answers, including a distant relationship with an influential businessman who had quietly built one of the largest privately held investment empires in the country. According to the attorney, that elderly billionaire had recently passed away without direct heirs, and after years of legal reviews, trusts, and estate proceedings, Ethan Brooks had been identified as the principal beneficiary. This was not prize money, a lucky investment, or a sudden cryptocurrency fortune. It was generations of accumulated wealth consisting of multinational companies, commercial real estate, private equity holdings, investment portfolios, intellectual property, and controlling interests in businesses spread across several industries. The estimated value exceeded $100 billion. Ethan sat in complete silence, unable to process what he had just heard. Within days, he found himself surrounded by attorneys, financial advisors, and executives explaining responsibilities that most people could never imagine. Lauren Brooks had spent months convincing herself that walking away from her marriage had been the only sensible decision she could have made. She had repeated that belief so many times that it eventually sounded like the truth, even though there were quiet moments when she wondered what might have happened if she had stayed just a little longer. Then one evening, While scrolling through the news, she saw a familiar face appear across every major television network in America. The headline announced that Ethan Brooks had officially assumed control of a business empire valued at more than $100 billion. She immediately stopped what she was doing, turned up the volume, and stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The man standing before reporters looked different, not because of expensive clothing or the executives surrounding him, but because of the confidence in his eyes. It was the same determination she had once admired, only now it was accompanied by a quiet sense of peace that she had never seen before. As the interview continued, memories she had buried for years came rushing back with painful clarity. She remembered the tiny apartment where they had shared inexpensive dinners while laughing about the future they believed was waiting for them. She remembered every late night Ethan spent working on business plans after everyone else had gone to sleep. Then came the memories she wished she could erase. Every argument over unpaid bills. Every harsh word spoken during moments of frustration. Every time she questioned his judgment. Every time she told herself he was chasing dreams that would never become reality. Finally, she remembered the courthouse, the divorce papers, and the last sentence she spoke before walking away. Those words echoed in her mind with a weight she had never fully understood until now. For the first time since the divorce, Lauren began asking herself whether she had abandoned Ethan because he lacked success, or because she had simply lost faith before his story had reached its most important chapter. Sleep became almost impossible. News reports about Ethan appeared everywhere she looked, and each interview reminded her of the man she had once promised to stand beside through every season of life. Within days, she quietly hired a private investigator who legally located Ethan's publicly available residential address through corporate filings and other lawful records connected to his new responsibilities. She rehearsed countless conversations in her mind before finally gathering the courage to make the trip herself. When she arrived, the property was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Massive iron gates protected a sprawling estate hidden behind carefully maintained grounds. Security personnel monitored every entrance while a black SUV slowly approached the main residence after confirming her identity. Lauren stepped out carrying a small bouquet of white flowers, holding them so tightly that her hands trembled. For several long moments, she simply stood there, wondering whether she should turn around before anyone saw her. Instead, she walked to the entrance and quietly asked if Ethan Brooks would be willing to see her. After what felt like an eternity, the front door opened. Ethan had agreed to meet her. Relief washed over Lauren's face for only a brief moment, because she quickly realized this would not be the emotional reunion she had imagined. Ethan did not greet her alone. Standing beside him were his chief legal advisor and the head of his personal security team, both present because every unexpected visitor was now treated with caution. Ethan looked at Lauren with calm eyes, thanked her for coming, and politely invited her inside. There was no anger in his voice, no excitement, and no sign that the years between them had suddenly disappeared. In that instant, Lauren understood that although the door had opened, the distance between their hearts might be far greater than the distance she had traveled to reach his home. The walk through the mansion felt much longer than it actually was. Lauren Brooks followed Ethan Brooks past elegant hallways lined with artwork collected over generations, photographs of company founders whose names had shaped industries, and windows overlooking acres of carefully maintained grounds. Yet none of the luxury around her held her attention. All she could think about was the last time she had walked beside Ethan. Back then, they had been leaving a courthouse with nothing except painful memories between them. Now they sat across from one another in a quiet room where the silence carried more weight than any argument they had ever shared. Ethan calmly thanked an assistant for bringing coffee before asking everyone else to leave. As the door closed, neither of them spoke for several moments. There was no shouting, no accusations, and no attempt to reopen old wounds. Ethan simply waited. Lauren looked down at the flowers she had carried all the way to the estate before realizing she had never even handed them to him. Her hands trembled as tears slowly rolled down her face. She took a deep breath, knowing there was no perfect way to begin a conversation she should have had years earlier. Finally, she looked into Ethan's eyes and quietly said, "I'm sorry." The words were followed by more tears than sentences. She admitted that she had allowed fear to become stronger than faith, that every financial setback had slowly convinced her their future would never change, and that leaving had become the decision she regretted more than any other. Through her tears, she whispered the words she had rehearsed countless times before arriving at the mansion. "I never stopped loving you." Ethan listened without interrupting. His expression never changed, and that calmness made Lauren even more emotional because she could not tell what he was thinking. For years, Ethan had replayed the end of their marriage in his mind, asking himself one question over and over again. Did Lauren truly love him for the man he was? Or did she only love the future she hoped he would someday give her? That question had stayed with him through every lonely night, every rejection, and every small victory that eventually led him to this extraordinary moment. Lauren reached across the table with hesitant hands and softly asked the question that had brought her there. "Can we start over?" The room became completely silent. Seconds passed like minutes as Ethan looked out the window before turning back toward the woman who had once shared every dream with him. Anyone expecting bitterness or humiliation would have been surprised by what happened next. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not remind Lauren of every painful word she had spoken. He did not ask security to escort her from the property. Instead, he offered her sincere forgiveness, telling her that carrying resentment for years would only have imprisoned his own heart. Lauren's eyes filled with hope, believing forgiveness meant the beginning of a new chapter together. Then Ethan gently continued speaking, and every word carried the quiet strength earned through years of hardship. He explained that forgiveness and reconciliation were never the same thing. Some relationships can heal, while others leave lessons that should never be forgotten. Looking directly at Lauren, he calmly said, "You didn't leave because I had nothing. You left because you believed I'd always have nothing." Those words settled over the room with a quiet force neither of them could escape. Lauren lowered her head as the full meaning finally reached her. Ethan was not condemning her. He was simply speaking the truth they had both spent years avoiding. In that moment, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, it became painfully clear that the most valuable thing either of them had lost could never be measured in dollars. Lauren Brooks slowly stood from her chair, holding the bouquet she had forgotten to give Ethan Brooks when she first arrived. She looked around the room one last time, but the grand estate no longer represented the life she wished she had. Instead, it reminded her of everything that had slipped away long before the fortune ever existed. As she quietly thanked Ethan for listening, he nodded with genuine kindness, wishing her nothing but peace and happiness in whatever came next. There were no dramatic goodbyes and no promises to meet again. The silence between them said everything words no longer could. As Lauren walked toward the front door, every step felt heavier than the last. Passing through the hallway, she noticed framed photographs of Ethan visiting manufacturing plants, meeting employees, and smiling with children during charity events. It became painfully clear that while she had been mourning the billionaire standing before her, the person she truly lost was the man who had loved her when he had nothing to offer except hope, loyalty, and an unshakable belief in tomorrow. The wealth had not transformed Ethan into someone new. It had simply given the world an opportunity to see the character that had always existed beneath years of hardship and rejection. Sometimes wealth doesn't change people. It simply reveals who they already were. In the months that followed, Ethan refused to let his inheritance become a symbol of personal revenge or endless luxury. Instead, he directed enormous resources toward causes that reflected the struggles he understood all too well. He established foundations that funded hospitals in underserved communities, ensuring families could receive life-saving treatment regardless of their financial circumstances. He created scholarship programs that opened doors for hardworking students whose dreams had been limited by opportunity rather than ability. He expanded support for veterans returning home after years of service, investing in housing, career training, and mental health initiatives designed to help them rebuild their lives. Children's charities received long-term funding to improve education, nutrition, and healthcare, while small business owners struggling to secure traditional financing found new opportunities through investment programs that believed in determination as much as financial projections. Ethan often explained that every dollar invested in another person's future carried more value than any luxury he could buy for himself. Reporters frequently asked how it felt to become one of the wealthiest people in the world almost overnight, But those closest to him noticed that his answer rarely focused on the money itself. The greatest inheritance wasn't the money. It was finally understanding his own worth. For years, Ethan had measured himself through the opinions of investors, friends, and even the person he loved most. Losing everything taught him a lesson that gaining everything only confirmed. True value can never depend on another person's belief in your potential. That realization became the foundation of every decision he made after inheriting the empire. As for Lauren, she carried with her a lesson equally powerful, understanding that faith in someone should never depend on the results that have not yet arrived. Some opportunities disappear forever, not because love was absent, but because belief disappeared first. And perhaps that is the hardest truth of all. The people who believe in you only after you've won never truly believed in you at all. If you were in Ethan Brooks' position, would you have given Lauren Brooks a second chance, or would you have chosen to walk away forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below because we genuinely love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories filled with unforgettable life lessons, emotional moments, and powerful endings, don't forget to subscribe and watch the next story on your screen. You won't want to miss what's coming next.